So, if you turn in your Bibles, please, to John chapter 21. Now, I wondered whether we would actually read the whole of the chapter through, or whether you'd be happy if I just did a recap of the first 14 verses, which we talked about the last time we were together, as we looked at this extraordinary experience of Jesus meeting with the disciples as they have been fishing all night and caught nothing. So I think maybe we'll read it all the way through again, and we can share our thoughts. But it sort of all belongs together. When I look at John chapter 21, I'm never certain whether John saved this incident up deliberately as one of the resurrection stories and thought, well, I must finish on this note. Did he do that? Or had he finished chapter 20, where he ends up saying that Jesus did many other wonderful things that are not recorded in this book? Oh, wait a minute, there is one more. And they kind of suddenly thought, maybe I'll add that in. But it is an interesting story, and I've put some suggestions to you that we try to think, what was Jesus's purpose in the experience we're going to read together? How did Peter feel about it all? How did John feel about it all? Because he was privy to everything that was going on, everything that was said and done. So all of those things to think about. What's its significance as far as you and I are concerned in the 21st century, as we look back 2,000 years almost to this particular incident that takes place at the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake of Galilee. I don't care what you call it. Not quite an ocean, but it is referred to as the sea. Okay, so we've got a long reading that we're going to read together. There are 25 verses, and if we did more or less, shall we say, somewhere around 5 or 6 verses at a time, and then let somebody else read some. And it doesn't matter if we swap from one version to another. We can swap from the King James Version to the Message, if you like, but we follow in our own Bibles, and we can then respond. So this is the last chapter of the good news that John writes about Jesus. So who's going to start us off, please, with the first few verses of John chapter 21?
Afterward, Jesus appeared again.
It's not coming across very clearly.
Afterwards, Jesus. Is that better?
Yes. Beautiful.
No. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. No, I can't see. The light's awful. Yeah, you carry on. Yeah.
Well, the lights are not very good. Right. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your nets on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish.
Thank you. Somebody else take it on.
Go on. Oh.
Somebody else like to read?
Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing a net full of fish, for they were not far off from shore, about 100 meters. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn.
Someone else carry on.
Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dare ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you really love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." And the third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you."
Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you were old, you will stretch out your hands, and sometimes someone will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me."
Who's going
Carry
to
on.
finish it?
Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at supper and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to him, "It is my will that he remain. If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if it is my will that he remains until I come, what is it to you? This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them down. And we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written.
And to feel the joy and the thrill that John had as he was recording these things. Let's just take a moment to think about who's in the story at the beginning. So go back to the first few verses and just have a look again and see who's involved. We've got Simon Peter and we've got Thomas. Now that's interesting because we've got the most impetuous and the most doubting. Okay, so we've got both of them. Then we've got Nathaniel from Cana in Galilee. That is the place where Jesus fed the 5,000. Okay, so that's where Nathaniel comes from, and Philip. And then we've got the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, who were fishermen. So we've got three fishermen, but there's no Andrew here. So I don't know where Andrew was. There's no Andrew. And we don't know whether all the disciples were together when the story starts. The story starts with Peter saying, I'm going out to fish. So we can presume it was probably evening time or afternoon, and he's decided he's going to go fishing, and we know that he went fishing through the night. So it's an interesting mix of people, and this little group of disciples, or the whole, there may have been others as well, but certainly this little group of named disciples who are going to share this extraordinary experience are prompted to go fishing by Peter saying, I'm going out to fish. Now, we're not told that he said anything else. He didn't say, I'm fed up or I'm bored or, I'm dying to see the next time Jesus appears. Jesus has been twice with them in the upper room, a week apart. First time on Easter Sunday morning, and the second time a week later or 8 days later when Thomas was with them. And Thomas makes that amazing proclamation as he falls on his knees before Jesus and says, my Lord and my God. It's rather good, isn't it, that comes near the end of the story, as that's how John begins his story. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So anybody want to comment about we'll think of it all, but we'll talk about the breakfast time first. So let's take a few minutes and we reflect on some of the things we said last time together, and what do you think is actually going on. But if you can bear in mind, why did John tell us this? What was in John's mind that was so important? What do you think was in the mind of Jesus? I'm sure he's got a plan, because he got everything ready, hadn't he, before they came back with their fish. They'd already got breakfast ready for them. So what was in the mind of Jesus? What was he going to be achieving through this whole thing? And what was going on in the mind of Peter through it all, and perhaps also of John as he observed it. So, okay, focusing first on the breakfast. Anybody want to sort of make any comments about the fishing and the breakfast?
I had a new thought that this was the second or third time that Jesus had fed people with fish and bread. And whereas the previous meal, the feeding of 5,000, was a public thing, this is almost like an intimate meal.
Yeah.
So the first probably was sort of, I'm thinking off the top of my head, was a public event to prove who Jesus was. Now they were convinced, and this is him commissioning. And also previously, that it was Jesus who provided the fish and bread. Now he's getting them to also contribute to the fish, and it's like the task has been passed on to the disciples. That he'll still be in the background through the Holy Spirit, but we also have to respond and make our contribution.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's very interesting, isn't it, that the ministry of Jesus included feeding his disciples. And we live in a world, just think at the present situation in Gaza and the obstruction by the Israelites of the relief vehicles and everything. So you've got people starving hungry in Gaza just now, but in other parts of the world, and maybe down the road where we live, there may be people who can't make ends meet and are wondering where their next meal is coming from. So we have to think about, is it part of our gospel ministry to provide food, natural food, for the hungry?
Yeah.
But some people quite concerned about social action and say, well, that's not the gospel. Is it the gospel? What do you think?
Well, I think anyone who thinks that has never read the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Particularly Matthew's gospel is all about feeding the hungry.
Yeah.
And I think that the trouble is we focus so much on the spiritual side, but particularly Matthew, I can never remember if it's 23 or 26, the sheep and the goats. Sort of, Jesus is saying, I am there when you are feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, in prison and being visited. And I think that is quite as central to the gospel as sort of what you believe and making a commitment.
Okay, thank you, David. That's very helpful. In Market Harborough, where I live, all the supermarkets, and I think one or two other shops as well, all have a basket that you can put food into. So when you're doing your shopping, we're encouraged to buy a few extra things and drop them in the basket for our local food bank, which was set up by the churches, which is good. It's now an independent charity, but it's still staffed mostly by people from the churches. Come on, other comments or questions? There's a lot in just those opening verses that we talked about last time that's worth reiterating.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you're just praying. You can't actually do it. But like when Bedford Street Angels go out, we have an email to say that they're praying at 10 o'clock and who's going out and who's going to watch. And then after it's all gone, the evening's gone, they send back sort of Monday, they send back what happened and all the things that happened and how the police supported them and then they pray and we can pray as well. And it seems as though you're part of that, although you're only at home, but you can imagine.
There's always something
spreading the word as well, they're taking the Bibles as well, but they give out flip-flops and make sure that people that have had too much to drink get home safe. And it's a marvellous thing, to think.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So that's another dynamic dimension of caring for people. Jean, were you wanting to say something?
Well, if you can hear me, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just thinking sometimes because of what James says about you can't, your faith isn't dependent on your good works. You can't earn anything. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't do these things. But instead of using feeding people and helping them to make us kudos for ourselves, it becomes a natural outgiving because of the love we have, because of the love that God has given us. And you can't help. The more we know God and love God, we can't help but give out.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry that you're croaky. Hopefully you'll be feeling better. You can leave it on, Jean.
Well, I keep coughing.
Oh, right. Well, we might cope. Right. Any other comments? Take us anywhere you like in these opening verses. The miracle that they experience. We have some comments about that miracle. Is it relevant that it was similar to another miracle that had taken place in the past? And is there anything else that's similar? Is there any sort of echoing things going on? Yes, Fiona.
Well, he was serving them bread and fish, and he was kind of breaking the bread and giving it out. So that's a bit like the Last Supper again.
Yes. Yes. Very good.
We don't know why they went fishing, do we? I mean, were they bored, or were they feeling that they were lacking a direction? And so they needed to know, they needed their commission renewed. And so he was reminding them of the fact that they were due to fish men, and that he was going to provide the catch. I was reminded of when I did a teacher training course, and it was too much for me. I couldn't continue it. My health just was all over the place. And so it was a half term in February, and I told the school I couldn't continue, and I told the college I couldn't continue. And at the end of that week, it was the Christian Booksellers Convention in Blackpool. And so John was due to go up on the Monday, and I went into school on the Monday and cleared up everything and went up on the Tuesday by train. And then on the Thursday night, we came back, and we had a phone call from a friend because we hadn't had a car for a couple of years because we couldn't afford to renew the broken down one. We had a phone call from a friend saying, would you like our car? Because Diane's father has given us his old one and it'll do for a year or two. And we said, yes, please. That would be great. John had just ordered a road atlas. And I said, why are you ordering a road atlas? We haven't got a car. And John said, well, I've got a feeling that we're going to have one soon. And the road atlas arrived at about 6 o'clock, and the car arrived about an hour later. Well, on the Saturday, I went into the Christian bookshop with John because he was managing it there, and I was working in the office. And as we were walking home up the hill, a man was coming towards us with a butcher's bag in his hand. And he said to us, do you eat steak? And we said, yes. And he said, well, would you like this steak? There's enough for 4 people in here. And we said, well, can you explain why? He said, well, I've had a big row with my wife. We were going to have a dinner party with friends, and I've cancelled it. So if you don't want it, I'm going to put it in this bin. And so we said, well, thank you very much. And so I thought, well, I hope it's not poisoned. And we went home with this steak, and we froze 2 parts of it. And then I said, I realized God was saying, you don't need to finish the teaching course. You don't need to earn money through teaching to have a car or to eat steak, Dorothy. I have provided both of them. And I think that's what Jesus was doing with the fish and the breakfast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Lovely.
So there are issues there about God's promised provision. I just asked the question. Peter used to fish in the past. Why was his profession fishing?
Because he was
It wasn't so he could have a dinner, was it? It was to make money.
Mm.
So it was his livelihood. Okay. So one of the possible answers to the question, why did they do it, is Peter might have thought, we need some cash. Yes. We need some money. Maybe he was worrying about where the next meal was coming from and so on, and needed to learn that God was going to provide for him. And of course, everything was ready. The fire was ready, that there was fish already on it and bread. All of that was there. So there was enough bread for everybody to have bread. And there was at least some fish already by the time they brought the fish up. And then they would have had to have gutted it and prepared it and cooked it. So they had a bit more. So, yes, wonderful thinking about God's provision.
As well, as I said before, they may have been going to sell it, or take it home, so that their families are going to have money and that to provide on because they're going with Jesus. So yes. In the way the Lord is providing for them with this great big catch of fish. They got so many fish, sort of. That's an income, isn't it, that they can leave behind because when they go out, they don't take nothing with them. So,
I was thinking there was far more than they needed at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, not only was it 153 fish, but large fish as well.
Yes.
Far too many for that small group of disciples.
Yes. So many fish that they could not pull the net in.
Yeah.
So it was probably tipping the side over, I should think, and making life very difficult. And they managed to eventually drag it up the beach, but that would have been quite difficult to do. Too heavy to lift.
It's only God's provision that they caught fish. They didn't catch any fish, did they?
No.
Only when Jesus told them to cast the net on the other side, they actually caught fish. So they had a bad night, really.
No.
Using their own skills too.
Yes.
They were using the skills of the carpenter when they actually produced the fish.
Yes. So often we don't do things because we feel we can't do exactly what we would like to do, but there's always something we can do. We have natural talents and we can use those anytime. Okay.
I'm interested in the fact that the net didn't break. That hadn't really struck me as being really important until tonight. I'm sure that's really important.
Yes. Yeah. Big harvest, and yet the net did not break. So it was just like they must have been quite amazed at that as well. And what's the significance of that, we wonder. Right, okay. I did indicate, because I'm sure you know, that when Peter was first called to be a disciple, he had a similar experience to this. Jesus went into his boat in order to preach to the crowd on the shore, and then he said to Peter, push out into the deep, which he did, and then he told him where to put the net, and caught a big quantity of fish, so many that the boat was about to sink, and they had to call to James and John to come and help them in order to get the fish back to shore without sinking on the way. And the response of Peter on that occasion was to fall on his knees before Jesus and say, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. The response on this occasion is just of absolute wonder. And he rushes to meet with Jesus, this person he didn't recognize at first, who had called out to them. Any other comments? Is there anything else there? We've talked about whether the meal reminded them of the upper room meal that they'd had, and we've talked about the catch of fish. Is there anything else?
No, just that this was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. And it's funny, he asked Peter 3 times. So it's almost as though he was there for all those 3. And now, sort of...
well, shall we think about those in a few moments then?
After his resurrection, isn't it?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay. They were gathered around a fire. A fire had been lit. They would use charcoal usually to get the right amount of heat. If you've ever done a barbecue, you don't really want to cook things in the flames, but you do need the heat. And there was another occasion when Peter sat around a fire not many days before. So the smell of the fire, how these things, smells are so important, aren't they? Like the smell of bacon frying or onions that are frying, and you can smell things, and they bring back memories, and the smell of that fire that they gathered around for their breakfast must have reminded Peter of the smell of the fire a few days earlier, where he had denied knowing Jesus, even knowing him. Right. Anything else?
I've always wondered how long it is between
Jesus.
I've always wondered how long it is between the appearances of Jesus. I mean, we know that it was a whole week between the sort of first and the second. It could have been quite a while again. And so they thought, is Jesus going to come back again? Let's do something.
Okay, yes, yeah. Just possibly the absence of guidance and motivation. 3 years they'd spent just walking where Jesus walked, or apart from the times when he told them to go out and fish for men. which he did, having said that to the first disciples, that's what they were going to do. So lots of things in this experience were bringing back memories of a miraculous catch of fish, the fire where Peter had gathered around, God's provision, reminding them, perhaps echoes of the upper room, all sorts of things in this. This is an occasion of a number of things being remembered. Now, John does not say that Peter went for a walk with Jesus, but he clearly did, because we're told later on that John was following them. So they must have got up. So I kind of get a picture in my mind of they finished the meal, and Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Come with me. We're going for a little walk." You know, he must have invited him to go with him. And so they walk along the shore, and as they walk, they talk, and they're having this extraordinary conversation, which starts in the account we have in John's Gospel, chapter 21, with this question: "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" More than what? Ideas, suggestions?
The disciples.
Fish.
Chrissy, what did you say?
It might be the fish, right?
It might have been the fish. Okay, yes. I mean, fishing was the focus on the time. So I thought, I'm quite happy with the idea. Do you love me more than fish?
Yeah.
More
Fiona.
than your job.
How about these other disciples?
Yes.
Yeah, it could have been, do you love me more than these? Because Peter had said, hadn't they? They may all let you down, but I won't. You can rely on me. I'll never fail you. That's not might, but I won't. And yet it was it Thomas who had said, when Jesus was going to go to Jerusalem, let's go with him. We'll die with him there. So there was a willingness of some to die for Jesus. So it might have been the other disciples, or it might have been the fish. Right? Any other ideas? Right? Okay. Now,
Could be, do you
Peter's
love me
response
more than
is,
you love the others.
sorry?
It could mean, do you love me more than you love the other disciples?
Yes, indeed, it could have been.
Yeah.
But it is about comparison, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I'm sure we all know that Jesus uses one word that we've got translated as love, and the response of Peter was with a different word. So we have Jesus using the word agape, which is sacrificial love. It's the love that God has for us, is agape love. It's generous and it's costly, it's sacrificial. It's willing to go without, that others might be blessed. So he says, do you agape me? And Peter's response is, yes, Lord, he says. So he says, yes, he does. But then he says, you know that I love you. And he uses the word philia, which is another Greek word for love, but it's the kind of love that there is in families, and it's love which is responsive. So sometimes if you're loved, you love back. You know, I love you too. And it's that kind of love. So in the thinking of those who spoke Greek, philia was seen as a lesser degree of love. We might think in English that we might say fond. So it'd be like Jesus saying, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he says, yes, Lord, you know that I'm really fond of you, but it's not quite the same thing. And then Jesus responds to Peter and says, feed my lambs. And then we get the second time Jesus asks the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me, agape? And Peter answers, yes, Lord, you know that I love you, philia. respond, love, but not quite the same degree. Jesus says, take care of my sheep. So first feed my lambs, then take care of my sheep. The third time he said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he uses the term philia. So he takes the word that Peter has been using. It's almost as if he's saying, can I rely on you to love me that much? Peter is being honest. And now Jesus is probing his honesty by saying, can I trust you that you're being honest and you do love me that much? And Peter, we're told, is hurt. He was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time and used a different word. So he was hurt because of how he asked him, not just that he'd asked him 3 times, although the 3 times might be relevant, as Chrissy was indicating just now. Peter's response is, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And he uses the word philia. So he never oversells his love for Jesus. He's humble about that. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. So we've got feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. And then he warns Peter of what lies ahead. So any other comments? Anybody want to come in and say anything about those questions and answers and what is going on? What is it that Jesus is trying to elicit by asking this question 3 times? What does Jesus really need to hear or really want to hear? And how is Peter feeling as he's asked these things?
What strikes me is the way Jesus addresses Peter. He doesn't call him Peter, no. But each time Simon, and for some reason as well, son of John, Simon, son of John. I mean, he said, on this rock, I'll build my church. Peter, he obviously deliberately doesn't address him as such at this point.
No.
So he's gone back to his name, using his name before he became a disciple.
Yeah.
His sort of his family, really, his family origins.
And that's where the family love comes in, of course, the philia, isn't it?
Yes. Any other comments or questions? Jean has been busy making notes.
Now just added them in, yeah.
Either that or it's a shopping list. I'm not sure.
It's 3 times that he's disowned him, and 3 times now he's saying he loves him.
Yeah.
It's 3 times. So it's as though he's being forgiven 3 times and really 3 times.
And I haven't got it in front of me, but I believe when Peter was asked the question in the courtyard, it was put in a negative sense. You're not one of his disciples, are you? And then again, you're not one of his disciples. But the third time it was most certainly, you are. Yes, you are. And then he denies it with oaths. So he swears that he doesn't know Jesus. The third time he really lays it down. His denial is very, very strong. And then the cock crowed, and immediately the door opened in the high priest's house, and Jesus came out, and it says that Jesus turned and looked on Peter, and Peter remembered he was told he was going to let Jesus down, and he went out, and this burly fisherman wept bitterly, broke his heart because he had denied Jesus. What is Jesus trying to elicit in this conversation? Is it just that he needs to be loved? Is that true, that Jesus just needs, is he got a problem about himself, that he needs to get Peter saying that he loves him? Or is Jesus trying to do something else?
It would have been easy for Jesus just to say to Peter, I know what you did. And Peter would say, I'm really sorry for what I did, and Jesus, forgive him. You know, that would be the normal approach. Jesus has gone about it this way because it obviously means more than that. Now you can tell me what that more is.
Well, I think we can only speculate and just throw into the mix the fact that when Jesus appeared in the upper room on the two previous occasions when all the disciples were together, what was the first thing that Jesus said?
Don't be afraid.
Peace be with you.
Yeah.
Did he say shalom? Peace be with you. And the concept behind shalom is the declaration that it's okay, that we're okay. So it's like Jesus saying, hi guys, now don't get anxious, it's all okay. And if you think about the fact that they'd let him down, they'd run away, and you know, all of that. So when he met them in the upper room, his first words were to assure them that it was okay between them. There wasn't a problem. You know, it's so often that we hang on to when we're hurt. And if we've hurt somebody else, I've been corresponding today with somebody that I know I've hurt. I didn't do it deliberately, but it's just something about me and who I am and what I believe. And it's offended a very good friend of mine. And I'm just conscious that he's so hurt. It's really difficult to let it go. And I need really to hear him speak words of love and peace and give me a hug so that I know that we're still good brothers. And it's until that happens, I'm in a difficult position. And so Jesus puts that to one side. But here, the first thing he says is, come and have breakfast. So he doesn't speak any words of peace. It's straight. And then after breakfast, he's into challenging Peter. So if it's not Jesus that needs some kind of assurance from this conversation, it has to be Peter that needs something from this conversation. So he has to gain something from a discussion about how much love he has for Jesus. He has something to gain from all of that, and something to gain from the way Jesus follows each one up by feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. So these things are important psychologically and spiritually for Peter, who must have been hurting. He went out and wept bitterly, but that wasn't the end of his sadness. I'm sure he was carrying a tremendous sense of guilt. And somehow he needs this conversation to relieve him of this burden of guilt that he's got because he failed the Lord and let him down. And I'm sure that all of us have been in a similar situation where we've declared that we'd follow Jesus all the way and then allowed a little thing just to spoil and mar that walk with Jesus. And we feel the guilt. We carry the guilt, and we need to hear words of love and forgiveness.
And it's almost as though John's reaffirming, I mean, Jesus is reaffirming the friendship and that he's moved along, but he's reaffirming what they started off with, and he's reaffirming that he loves him and and he's going to do the job that he. So that's a way of forgiving him almost, and John would feel forgiven because he's reaffirming that he's capable of, feeding the sheep and doing that. The trust is still there. The trust is back.
It's a kind of get on with the job, isn't it?
Yes.
I realised that meeting Peter on the beach was the only way he could do it, really. I mean, when he came among the disciples in the room, he wouldn't have been able. I don't think, to speak to Peter on his own, would he?
No.
So it had to be the situation, on the beach where they could go for a walk and just the two of them.
Yes. It's just a shame that somebody was eavesdropping.
Yeah.
It's really, isn't it, a very intimate conversation that's going on.
Yeah. Well, you say eavesdropping. I've always wondered whether Peter asked John to put this passage in.
An interesting thought.
Yeah.
You'll have to wait till you get to heaven and ask.
Yes, I will. Yes, I know. But it makes sense to me that's why it's here.
Yeah. Well,
When
I
you think
asked the
about it.
question, why did John want to include this story? And what was in it for Peter? What was actually going through? I have a suggestion to make to you. It's a bit sneaky, really, but I kind of think that in some ways it was not unfortunate that Peter denied Jesus. It was a dreadful experience to have denied Jesus at that moment when he did. But what kind of person would Peter have been if he hadn't let Jesus down and had to realize that all his talk of faithfulness was a bit of hot air? So it would have humbled him, wouldn't it?
And I was wondering as you were talking, sometimes when you do something and people will forgive you, but it's not always easy to forgive yourself. And Jesus,
or perhaps accept forgiveness that's being offered, but
Yeah.
to others.
and this way Jesus is going deeper into the forgiveness. And with each little part of forgiveness, he's not just saying, I forgive you, he's actually giving him something to do.
Yes.
Because he's saying, I trust you.
Yeah.
I forgive you, but I'm trusting you.
Yeah. My lambs, my sheep.
My sheep. He's given to him. And that would be a big thing. If I know if I'd done something wrong and the person I'd done it wrong to, then not only forgive me, but then trusted me. That's a big thing.
Yeah, I think back to childhood days, and I'm quite sure that at that time in our lives, we would most definitely need reassurance.
Reassurance. We
Yes.
still loved.
So there's a huge amount in this conversation that is important, that John sees it's important. He's finishing his story with this story. This is the pinnacle. One end we've got, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh. And at the other end, we've got Jesus interacting with a disciple, giving him assurance. And as we have said, he could not have done that in the upper room. He could not have done it. The question may have been relevant for the entire 11 disciples. Do you really love me? But it was important, most important for Peter. In a church I attended a week ago, the person who was preaching was a retired Baptist minister. He was a really good chap, gave a really good word. But he said, in the middle of it all, he said that Peter was the leader of the early church. And I said to him afterwards, you gave a wonderful word, but can I take issue with you? I don't think that Peter was the leader of the church. Now, if anybody thoughts about that, I think he was a leader, but he was one of 12 because they appointed Matthias. So he was one of 12. He was one of 3, Peter, James, and John, who were closer to Jesus. So perhaps he was significant, a bit more significant. But I don't think that in the church it's hierarchical and that there is anyone more significant and important than another. We're all interdependent. and we're all nothing without God's grace.
He did give the lead, of course, on the day of Pentecost.
Yes,
He takes a lead, and that's fine and sensible. And I think that on the day of Pentecost, when he preached the gospel, he was fulfilling what Jesus said about being given the keys of heaven. You know, he opened the door and let people come in. He invited people to come in, and later he was the first to lead Gentiles to Jesus. So he did both, and so he was significant. But I don't think I want to call him the leader.
Well, didn't they choose James as their leader anyway?
Well, James is described as a pillar in the church.
Yeah, and
yes, and
they went to him
he
about letters and things.
Yeah, he was significant. Peter and James, the brother of Jesus, he was another one. James, the brother of John, who wrote this gospel, had been killed. He was killed by Herod before the time that Peter goes down to talk with the apostles in Jerusalem to check out his gospel. But that's when we're told that James James was a significant person.
Wasn't it though when Peter was called the rock that he built his church on that rock? You know.
Yes, but was it? There's a great big conversation, isn't it? Was it on the personality and person of Peter, or was it on his faith and the declaration, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God"? And Jesus replies,
"Yes,
blessed are you, Peter, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And on this rock I will build my church." So the question is, was it on Peter, or was it on the declaration that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God?
Do you know, I've never thought of that before. I've always assumed it was Peter.
Yes. And his name, it was changed. I mean, it was called Rocky, wasn't he?
But I think you're right.
Rocky.
Yeah, I don't think it was his name. It was on what he said. That makes a lot more sense, doesn't it?
It's not the Catholic Church teach that it's Peter, don't they?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
and possibly buried under St. Peter's.
Possibly it may be that others do as well. So that's fine. I mean, people can have differences of opinion about a thing like that, and it doesn't radically change the gospel, doesn't change God's word in any way. So it's okay to have differences of interpretation and opinion, as long as we listen to one another. And that way you can hear what I say, which is correct.
Well, I was taught,
my
I've been taught that what you say is what is the truth.
Yes.
So it's,
yeah. Okay. So that's the conversation that's gone on, which is really quite helpful. Okay. And the response. And then Jesus tells Peter, if you look at verse 18, that there is a dark time ahead. He says, very truly, that's the in the Hebrew, amen, amen. I'll tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Now, I don't know about the timetable. I don't know. We know that John wrote his gospel probably around 100 AD. So it's about 50 years after Christ. And I don't know when it was that Peter was martyred. And I don't know if anybody's going to be quick enough to look it up while we're thinking about it and find out whether John, in saying about this, is to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God, whether that's John understanding that was what it was about? Or is it John looking back and having seen how Peter died? This is quite interesting between the balance of these two disciples. John, who refers to himself as the one that Jesus loved, the one who sat next to him in the in the upper room, and said, "Who is it, Lord, that's going to betray you?" So you know, he had a special, intimate relationship with Jesus, but so did Peter. But they're chalk and cheese in terms of their personalities.
My little thing, I've only got Paul martyred. I can't find Peter martyred.
Say again, Chrissy.
I can find where Paul was martyred, but I can't see on my little chart. It doesn't say.
Well, I could probably find it quite quickly. So. No. Right. Google to the rescue.
Oh, right.
He's believed to be martyred in Rome between AD 64 and 68. So that would have been before John wrote this gospel.
Mm.
468.
Yes, somewhere around between 64 68. Right, okay. Back to the book. And then there was this sort of response of Peter, because John's coming up the back and Peter's just heard some pretty strong words from Jesus. And so he turns and says, "What shall this man do? You know, what about this guy?" Was that Peter trying to get out from underneath, get the spotlight off himself for a moment? Or was it genuine concern for John? Could be either, couldn't it?
Mm. Yes,
does it matter to us about what other people do, or what does it matter to us what God has asked us to do for him?
Yeah.
Where should our focus be on? On what other people are not doing?
No, what we should be doing. What we should be doing.
Mm.
Take out the mite in your own eye before you take it out of somebody else.
Oh, funny. You're lovely.
When I'm perfect, then I can start moaning about this.
Absolutely. Let me know when that is, please. So John finishes it off by saying, "This is the disciple." So he's referring to the one who was following. This is the disciple who testifies to these things. So this is the disciple who's saying these things are true, right? And we know that his testimony is reliable. We know that it's true. He's sort of bigging himself up a bit there, right? But he's saying it significantly. So was Jesus needing to gain anything from this meeting with his disciples? What do you think?
Was Jesus trying, what Jesus would get out of it?
Yes.
Not the disciples.
What might Jesus have hoped or known he would gain out of this breakfast and the conversation that follows? What was important for Jesus to know?
They were strong enough to follow him and spread the good news. You'd need to know that they knew that.
And not be distracted? Is that important as well? Mm. You know, they've gone fishing, you know, it's going back to what they started.
Mm.
Jesus wouldn't want that. He wants them to go on building on what he's done. That's what he asked them to do. So in a sense, their assurance was significant for Jesus. Mm. I'm not saying he had a desperate need to be reassured, but I'm saying it was an important thing. He needed to know that they were going to carry on properly. What did Peter gain out of it?
You need assurance.
Sorry, Clive?
Could Jesus need assurance?
No, I don't think he needed assurance. I think it's a very interesting question, Clive. I'm sure that you tell God as much as I do that you love him and you will follow him and that you worship him and so on. For whose sake do we say those words? We tell God how much he means to us. We say what Jesus means to us. We put it into words. Is it important that we say it?
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
So somehow I think that maybe there is a gain, a spiritual dimension gain through it. But certainly Jesus doesn't need buttering up.
No, but
I didn't
he knew that they knew about being resurrected from the dead and being transformed to, so they knew that was true because he said, that he knew that, and they've said it in other places. So that would be what Jesus wanted them to say, because then he knew that they'd listened and understood that he was the Son of God. So that's sort of, because that's what they're saying, isn't it? I know.
Yes.
Yeah, I love you. So, so that's the whole idea, I should think. That.
So, what do we think? What do we think Peter may have gained out of this experience?
That he's realised that, that he is the Son of God, and that, that he can go on. It's all planned out and ready for him to carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the assurance that there's still a journey ahead of him, really important.
And that he can't do it in his own strength.
Say again, John?
That he can't do it in his own strength.
He can't do it in his own strength. So in a sense, perhaps it was a lesson in humility.
For whom?
For Peter.
Peter.
Mm.
Okay, and that Jesus doesn't require him to make grand gestures.
No.
And great sort of declarations. He wants him to be truthful about his own limitations. So it's the same thing really, as John said. He's made him accept the fact that he's got limitations. And so he can't rely on himself in the way that he thought he could.
Somewhere in the New Testament, in the letters, there is a phrase that says, confess your faults one to another. Is that in John? I think that might be in John, one of John's letters.
That's James.
Is it James?
I think it's James, yeah. The final chapter.
So how important it is that we're honest. We turn up in church and somebody says, how are you? And so you look at your best spiritual face on and say, I'm fine, thank you. But it's important that we're honest, that we're able to be honest. If you're part of a church where you can be honest and not project an image of yourself, but be honest about who you are, that's a blessing.
And your integrity as well, isn't it? It's your integrity.
Again, Chrissy.
It's your integrity that makes you, feel that and not be wanting to sort of, throw yourself and, you're going to be humble, but you're going to know that what you believe is the truth and you're going to stand up for that.
Yes.
That's your integrity.
I think I've told you before. In fact, I'm sure I have. I wrote a hymn about when I will one day meet Jesus, and it's got a repetition about when I see Jesus. goes through it all. And there's a verse that says, "Shall sad remorse begin to fill my mind? Or do you think, like Peter, I will find tears of regret are stopped by words so kind when I see Jesus?"
Yeah.
And for
And
me,
that's what
that's
this is
special,
about.
you know, the thought that I kind of hear Jesus saying sometimes, "It's okay, Barry, I wasn't expecting any more from you."
Mm.
So his love and his acceptance of our weaknesses is very special. So what did John have in mind that he had to have this story when he'd almost finished the story? And he sort of adds it like a postscript. This is a little bit more. So he presents this conversation about reinstating Peter as one of the disciples and who has his trust. You know, he's put that into the story. How does it leave us, Fiona?
Well, this was written after the book of Acts, where Peter plays a very big role at the beginning. So maybe there were people asking how, if he was denying Jesus and had let him down, how he came to have such a big role with everybody. And this is wanting to explain it.
Okay. Do you mean that John puts it in to keep a sense of balance in the thing?
No, to answer people's questions.
Right.
Like, people could be wondering why.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
because if they weren't there at the time and they're only hearing about it all afterwards,
Yes.
I'm sure Peter would have told people that he did deny Jesus and he did let him down.
Yeah.
And so some people would be saying, so if you're like that, how come God chose you to be the leader?
Okay. Well, John's name means grace. So maybe it was an act of grace on his part to sort of provide a bit of a testimony
Yeah, I'm
of,
going to say, yeah.
Peter's restoration. So
Because
ultimately,
when people give testimonies in church and that sort of thing, or write books, and it does make you, realise, and they're saying they have messed up and they've done this, that, and the other, and then they found Jesus, and then they've changed their life around. So it's the same sort of thing with him. That so as Fiona said, he's going to relate it and say, and answer the questions. Why,
yes.
Why did he,
Yeah.
So I think that's testimonies are so important.
And at the end, it's all about Jesus.
Yes.
Isn't it? It's all about Jesus. Fiona again. Fiona?
The thought just came to me that actually this end bit is not. The rest of the gospel has been all about Jesus, but this end bit is how we relate to Jesus.
Yes.
Yes.
And
this
gives a
is
lot
about
of hope,
us,
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Good point. Well, there we go. We have talked about Jesus for a good number of weeks. I don't know how many weeks we've gone through this, but it's been a blessing to me to go through it and discuss things with you. I've gained some fresh insights along the way, which has been really good. And there's always more to learn and more to discover. And it's good to be reminded of God and his love and his faithfulness and of the Saviour he's provided for us. So it's a really wonderful thing to be able to do this. So thank you all very much for all that you've shared over the weeks as we've talked about Jesus as revealed in John's Gospel. Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah. That's where he started. And then he tells us the story to unpack it and make it quite clear. And along the way, we see the disciples with questions, with doubts, with uncertainties, but we see them post-resurrection beginning to have fresh, great confidence. Now we know who he really is. And we're going to go out and tell the rest of the world about it. So on that note, let's just stop the recording a minute. And in fact, I think I'd stop the recording all the way through.